The room fell silent as the reporter's words echoed through the press hall. The question was sharp, designed to undermine, to challenge, and to provoke. How do you justify your support for someone like Trump? The reporter sneered, eyes locked on Karoline Leavitt, expecting an easy response. Isn't it just blind loyalty at this point? The weight of the question hung heavy in the air. Karoline, just 27 years old, had already faced more scrutiny than most in her position. But this was different. This wasn't about policies. This was about her character. The room waited, tension rising. Karoline stood tall, her expression unwavering. Blind loyalty, she repeated, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. You think this is about blind loyalty? No. This is about standing up for what's right, even when it's not popular. But before she could continue, the reporter was ready with another jab. You're too young to understand real politics, he interrupted. You haven't seen the damage Trump has caused. How can you support him after everything? That's when Karoline paused. The eyes of every person in the room were on her. She smiled. If you think supporting Trump is about age or loyalty, you're missing the point entirely. Before she could finish, a voice boomed from behind her. Let me answer that. The press room turned. All attention shifted. Donald Trump had entered the room. Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to political battles. At just 27, she had already made a name for herself as a staunch supporter of former President Donald Trump, navigating the harsh terrain of politics with remarkable poise. Her youth often made her a target for criticism, particularly from those who believed that experience was the sole qualifier for political credibility. Yet, Karoline's defense was always simple, principles over experience. She was a fighter, determined to stand for what she believed in, even if it meant facing constant scrutiny. It was this unwavering stance that had brought her to this very moment, facing a room full of reporters, all eager to challenge her at every turn. The question from the woke reporter was no surprise. It was a tactic many had used before. But this time, something was different. Karoline wasn't just defending her political views, she was defending the very essence of her beliefs. As the reporter's words hung in the air, his smug expression anticipated a quick win. He was sure that a young woman like Karoline, so closely tied to Trump, would falter under the weight of his accusations. But what he didn't expect was the silent strength that radiated from Karoline as she prepared her response. And just as the atmosphere thickened with tension, a voice interrupted the growing silence. Donald Trump, who had been listening from behind the podium, stepped forward. The room buzzed with anticipation as he took center stage. His presence, larger than life, filled the space. The reporter, clearly rattled, attempted to regain control of the narrative, but Trump's voice cut through like a laser. First of all, Trump said, his voice booming in the room, this isn't about age. And it's certainly not about blind loyalty. This is about common sense. The reporter stood frozen for a moment, his prepared rebuttal faltering under the weight of Trump's sudden appearance. Karoline's eyes flickered briefly toward Trump, a hint of gratitude in her gaze. She knew that in this moment, her ally wasn't just her mentor, he was her protector. Trump continued, his tone unwavering. You want to talk about loyalty? Well, let me tell you something. Loyalty isn't about following a leader blindly. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the entire world is telling you you're wrong. The reporter, still reeling from Trump's interruption, tried to regain composure. But Mr. President, he began, don't you think supporting someone with such a controversial past is dangerous for the country? Trump held up a hand, silencing him instantly. Controversial past? Let me tell you something, Trump said, turning his attention to the rest of the room. You've been fed this narrative that anything Trump does is wrong. But what you're really upset about isn't my past. It's the fact that I did things my way. I didn't play by the old, tired rules that kept Washington stagnant for decades. I got things done. And so has Karoline. Karoline, still calm, allowed Trump to continue, knowing this wasn't just about her. It was about showing the world that a new generation, one unafraid to challenge the establishment, was ready to take charge. Trump gestured toward Karoline. Look at her. She's young, yes, but she's smart, driven, and she isn't afraid to speak the truth. You think experience in Washington is the answer? Well, look where that's gotten us. Debt, wars, and more broken promises. The so-called experienced politicians have done nothing but line their pockets and waste taxpayer money. The reporter's face flushed as Trump's words hit home. There were murmurs of agreement throughout the room, reporters shifting uneasily in their seats. Trump wasn't done yet. You don't like Karoline because she's not part of your club. She's not one of your DC insiders. She hasn't spent years in the swamp, making deals with lobbyists and big corporations. She's here for the people. And that's why you fear her. The room shifted, some reporters exchanging knowing glances, others nodding slightly as Trump's words rang true. The reporter, now visibly flustered, tried to interrupt again. But we need experience in politics. Trump cut him off, his voice sharp. Experience? You mean the kind of experience that's gotten us into this mess? No thanks. I'll take someone like Karoline, who's here to make a real difference, over your so-called experts any day. The audience, once divided, now buzzed with energy. Trump's words had hit the mark, shifting the room's energy from skepticism to admiration. As Trump turned back to Karoline, he winked at her. You don't need to thank me, he said softly, his voice taking on a teasing tone. You're doing great on your own. Karoline couldn't help but smile, her confidence bolstered by Trump's unwavering support. She wasn't just standing her ground anymore, she was owning it. Karoline Leavitt, now emboldened by Trump's powerful defense, stepped forward. She didn't rush, but her calm demeanor only added to the intensity of the moment. As the eyes of every reporter in the room were fixed on her, she spoke, her voice cutting through the lingering tension with surprising ease. First of all, Karoline began, looking directly at the reporter who had tried to undermine her, I don't need your permission to be here. My age doesn't disqualify me from having a voice. It only means that I'm not part of a tired, old system that's been failing the American people for years. There was a shift in the room. The reporters were no longer skeptical of her youth, they were intrigued by her fearlessness. Karoline continued, her words deliberate, each one landing with precision. I've been in the trenches, working side by side with people who actually care about this country, people who aren't looking for their next career move, but are fighting for results. I didn't need decades to realize that the American people deserve better. What I've learned in my time here is that experience can often cloud judgment. Experience in the swamp doesn't guarantee the right decisions. It just guarantees you know how to play the game. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Karoline had not only flipped the narrative, she had exposed a painful truth. The audience, reporters included, were beginning to realize that her fresh perspective was exactly what this country needed. Her gaze sharpened as she addressed the reporter, his smirk now long gone. You talk about experience, but what you really mean is control. You want someone who fits your narrative, who checks all your boxes. Someone you can manipulate with your questions and your expectations. But that's not me. And it's not Donald Trump either. The reporter, taken aback, opened his mouth to respond, but Karoline raised her hand, signaling for him to be quiet. No, I'm done, she said, the finality in her words drawing the room into a stunned silence. I'm not going to sit here and let you define what I can and can't do because of my age, or because of what you think I should be. I'm here because I have a purpose. And so does Trump. We're both here to change the system, not to bow to it. Her voice softened, but the power behind it remained undeniable. So if you want to keep questioning me, that's fine. But just remember, there's a reason I'm sitting here, and you're sitting where you are. The room was still. It felt like time had stopped, as if everyone was waiting for the next moment of tension to break. But instead, Karoline's words hung in the air, and slowly, one by one, the reporter seemed to recognize the weight of what she had just said. In the silence that followed, Karoline Leavitt's words echoed through the room, leaving an imprint on everyone who had been there. It wasn't just her age that made her unique, it was her courage, her conviction, and her unwavering commitment to challenging the status quo. She had shown the world that the young can lead with strength, the experienced can learn from the fresh, and that the system doesn't always know best. The reporter, now visibly flustered, tried once more to gather his thoughts, but it was too late. The room had already shifted. The energy had changed, and with it, the perspective of everyone present. Trump, still standing by her side, leaned over with a smile. You did great, he whispered, his voice a reassuring presence in the midst of a storm. Karoline couldn't help but smile back, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She had made her point. She had stood up for herself and for the millions of Americans who felt ignored by the political establishment. The reporter's face had turned crimson, and the smug smirk that had been there just moments before had completely disappeared. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had no response. He had been silenced, not just by Karoline's confidence, but by the undeniable truth in her words. As Karoline and Trump walked off the stage, the room erupted into a mixture of murmurs and applause. Some reporters exchanged glances, others nodded in quiet approval. It wasn't just Trump's words that had resonated, it was Karoline's, too. She had proven that age wasn't a barrier to change, it was an advantage. And more than that, she had shown that sometimes, the biggest threat to the establishment wasn't a seasoned politician, it was someone with fresh ideas, unshaken by years of political gamesmanship. The moral of the story was clear. Real leadership isn't defined by age, experience, or how well you fit into the political machine. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, to challenge the norms, and to break through the noise with conviction. Karoline Leavitt, in that brief moment, had not only put the woke reporter in his place, she had changed the conversation, and in doing so, reminded everyone in the room of what true leadership looked like. As the scene came to a close, it was impossible to ignore the ripple effect of that conversation. Karoline Leavitt had not just defended herself, she had shown a nation that leadership, change, and progress often come from the unlikeliest of places. The crowd was still buzzing, but one thing was certain. Karoline Leavitt's message had struck a chord, and no one would forget the power of her words, or the impact of Trump's unwavering support. The tides of political change were shifting, and they were shifting fast.